What is the farthest you've traveled to get something you forgot? Work on a drilling crew, and when I got back to our lab on a Friday, I realized I had left the box of rock cores that we had just drilled back on a trailer we packed in a gas station about 3 hours away. I told the rest of our crew that I was going to go turn the samples in and that I would see them Monday. Instead, I drove 6 hours, there and back, to pick up the rock cores. If they had been stolen, it would have cost the company thousands of dollars because we would have had to offset and re-drill the hole. I once went on a trip to Six Flags that turned into a disaster. The weather got lightningy, so we only had time to ride 2 roller coasters before they shut down the park. There were a lot of us, so we drove in separate cars, and the driver of the second car lost his car keys on the second coaster, and the park employees could not recover them. I drove 3 hours to the park in the morning, rode 2 roller coasters, drove 3 hours back home to get my buddy's spare set, 3 hours back to Six Flags to drop off the keys, then 3 hours home again. On the plus side, I got to listen to almost all of Hitchhikers on audiobook. TLDR, 12 hours of driving to ride 2 roller coasters. Mine's pretty bad. I was just finishing my study abroad in Amsterdam, and I thought it would be a great idea to finish my trip by eating a magical brownie before my flight. I bought one at the coffee shop and I didn't listen to the guy when he said to eat half. I ate the whole thing. I got absurdly, uncomfortably high. Somehow, I was able to take my huge bag containing basically my life through the public transit and through the airport security and onto the plane. I was so freaking high, both literally and figuratively, during the flight that I felt like the 10 guy. About midway through the flight, they started providing me with free alcohol, and so I begin to make a toast with myself. Makes me feel like I'm not sadly drinking alone like an alcoholic. My toast with myself is always, it's cheesy, I know, to me and Mr. Pibb. Let us live together, forever, in sickness and in health. Mr. Pibb is my dog who I forgot to bring on the plane. I left him in my apartment while I got on a flight to leave the country permanently. Halfway through my self-toast, I realized that I've made a huge mistake JPG and proceeded to curse myself out for the rest of the flight, trying to figure out what to do while extremely high and extremely mad. Because you can't easily mail animals, I was actually forced to get back on another flight the next day and fly back to get my dog. I had to call my dorm supervisor and explain the situation, minus the weed part, and somehow get him to take my dog for a night. I think he probably thinks that I'm retarded, and so do my parents, except they also made me pay them back for the plane flight. Anyways, that's how I learned to never get high before you fly. TLDR. I love Mr. Pibb a lot. Don't drink and drive. Get high and fly. I once climbed a mountain to retrieve a camera one if the girls dropped at the top. It wasn't a very tall mountain, but still. Shoot, I left my camera back on top of. I shall retrieve it for you, Madam William. Fetch me my rope and carabiners. I am about to undertake a quest of monumental proportions. I go to recover my lady's lost picture taker. Dude, it's on top of the hill right there. I can see it from here. Silence. I once swam about 200 feet to return a beer koozie to a hot chick at the lake, as it had fallen off her boat. Only I forgot that I'm a crappy swimmer and had to yell for her to come rescue me as I flailed about trying to stay alive. I believe this is relevant to this thread. That story either ends in you two being married or her just saying thanks and then dropping your butt back off where you came from. Once I left my teddy bear in a hotel in Venice. I was so upset because I had had this bear my entire life and we were already 5 hours away in France when I realized it. I took that bear everywhere with me, so we all had a sentimental soft spot for it. I thought it was lost forever, but my dad insisted that we go get it. We turned the car around and my dad called the hotel to let them know to hold it for us. They told us to turn the car around and asked us where our next destination was. The Hotel Express shipped it all the way to our hotel in Lyon, France on their dime, so it was there for us the next morning. Thankfully we didn't have to travel too far thanks to some wonderful Italians. Hour and a half to check if I had turned off the hair straightener. I had. And I knew I had. This was right before I decided to go get help for my anxiety disorder. That's been my issue a lot lately. I've checked twice, but let's check again, just to make sure. I almost turned around halfway home from a weekend trip and drove over an hour back to the hotel to get my favorite phone charger. Fortunately, it occurred to me in time that it would quite literally cost me less time and money to just buy another one. When I was younger, I fell out with a mate of mine when I was at his house for a play date. I left his home in anger and pedaled home furiously, even disregarding traffic lights. I was really upset. When I got home, I realized that I left my fanny pack full of marbles in his bedroom. So I pedaled back to his house again, only for him to claim that I hadn't left it there, even though I know I had. In an attempt at revenge, at school the next week, I stole his packed lunch so he would starve. I still talk to him from time to time, but I freaking hate him because I know he's still got my freaking marbles. Prick. I know he's still got my freaking marbles. Probably not. Odds are he dumped them down the sewer grate out back as soon as you left. Stupid me vol 34. I wear an insulin pump for diabetes management, and after boarding a flight for a vacation, I realized I forgot it. It's small, and was hooked to my other pair of pants. Because I need it to live, I had to get off the plane, drive home, get it and come back to the airport. Luckily there was a nice lady at the counter, and she let me switch my flight for $75. That was almost a $1,000 mistake. GG Gina situation with the airline woman. The number of times I've had to drive an hour plus to pick up my meter, pump, insulin or other diabetes stuff is quite embarrassing. Happens to me all the time. I was once on a road trip from Portland to LA with my parents and 72-year-old grandmother, somewhere in northern CA, and 8+ hours into the drive, I was driving and the only one not asleep, and I stopped for gas and a Slim Jim, as is the road trip custom. When I got back to the car everyone was still asleep, or so I thought, so I hopped in and drove on. Apparently my grandmother had woken while I was inside and went in to use the bathroom. This was in the early 2000s and none of us had cell phones. About 3 hours later, mom wakes up in the backseat and says, "Honey, where's grandma?" I just started screaming and crying and flipped an illegal U-turn on the interstate. We made several unsuccessful attempts at finding a phone number tithe gas station at rest stops, all before the internet was readily available, until deciding we were wasting precious time and drove on. When we finally got to the place we left her, she was sitting on a bench outside the gas station chatting with the 16-year-old son who stayed an hour past closing with her. The worst part was how she kept apologizing for taking so long in the bathroom, as though we felt a 6-hour detention outside a creepy gas station was appropriate. TLDR, I'm a bad grandson. Granny's a genius. If she had berated you guys, you all would have been defensive. Her sweet granny taking blame attitude made you feel so much more guilty. Seriously though, Dale Carnegie. About 3 years ago, I was going on a date, I think it was Valentine's, and I asked my dad if he would let me borrow his car. It was a Nissan Altima and it was one of those cars with push to start that turns on if the beeper keys are within range. The thing is, I wasn't used to this since my car didn't have this function. Anyways, so I stop at a gas station and at Walgreens before I go to pick up my date. When I get there and I'm going to turn the car off to get out, I notice I don't have the keys with me. I searched all around the car but no dice, so then I have to go back to everywhere I had stopped and try to figure out where I had lost them. After about an hour of driving around, stopping various times at the gas station, Walgreens, and even going back home desperately trying to remember where I had left my dad's car keys, I went back to Walgreens, parked in the same parking spot, trying to recreate the circumstances to help me remember. I notice that the dash's display is no longer flashing keys out of range, so I get out and sure enough the keys had somehow fallen to the ground just under the car. In total I must have driven about 90 miles. Not to mention I was a bit late picking up my date. Thank God you didn't shut off the car. When I was in Iraq, I was talking to my 4-year-old on the phone and she kept asking if I forgot something. It took me a while to realize what she was saying, but I remembered a few days before I left that I had forgotten my wallet on a routine trip to the store, and I told her I forgot something and had to return home to get it. That is so sweet it sounds fake. We flew into Vegas for some wild times with friends before driving to Arizona for the national championship a couple years ago. got to Phoenix before my brother realized he forgot the tickets in Vegas. He did remember to have a few shots the morning we left though. 10 hours later we were back in Phoenix. I drove hungover for 2 hours to Deer. Finally found a parking spot on the furthest row of the parking lot. Walked the quarter mile to the terminal in 99-degree heat. Went to the counter to get my ticket. And my driver's license wasn't in my freaking wallet. I had absolutely no idea where it could be. I walked all the way back to my car and tore it apart looking for it. Traced my steps from the parking lot to the terminal a couple times. Nowhere to be found. Then it dawned on me. I called the bar I was at the night before. And yep, that's where it was. I had to change my flight. Drive 2 hours back to get my license. Turn right around and drive 2 hours back to the airport. That day sucked dong. At least you didn't get pulled over. A simple thing like that could go very wrong if you had no license and you had alcohol in your system. I left my social security card 6 hours away at home when I needed it to register for my college job, and for some dumb reason it had to be the original and I couldn't have it FedExed or mailed to me. It was even worse when they just looked at it, entered in the numbers and said okay. One time I forgot my passport in a hotel room in Paris, and I realized this on a bus to London, England. I was rejected at the border and told my best option was to try and find my passport and then I could enter the country. So, I took 2 trains, a bus, and a subway, back to my hotel to find my passport sitting exactly where it should have been, exactly where I left it, and I do a much more thorough pocket check before going anywhere nowadays. I didn't know they checked passports between France and the UK. I live on the 4th floor and if I make it outside and realize I forgot something, I either live without or buy a new one on my way. I lived on the 3rd floor of my on-campus townhouse 1 year and if I forgot my ID upstairs I would deal with the consequences of not having it instead of go upstairs to retrieve it. 4,136 miles. I made it all the way back to Chicago, went to put my key into the door, turned on my heels and took the same cab back to the airport. We've been married 7 years next month. Ooh, nice plot twist. Thought it was going to be that you left your keys. I want to hear the long version. I lost a mitt at a store in a town about 18 kilometers away. Realized when I got home. Drove back to find it. Turns out it was in between the door and passenger seat of my car. Would go again. I frickin' love those mitts. I forgot my beer one day so I walked back to the kitchen to get it. That was one heck of a rough 20 seconds. For a split second I thought I had drunk it already. It wasn't very far but it was quite urgent. Had a 3-hour trip ahead of us to go see Rammstein in concert. I checked with my friend a few times to make sure he had his ticket and he said that he did. We get an hour out. No ticket. Had to add an extra 2 hours onto our trip. But God was that concert amazing. Saw them in Edmonton. Drove 8 hours for it. Worth it. Buddy of mine was out of town and his car got booted for parking tickets. I agreed to go with his ex-wife to get it out of the pound. The ex lived 35 miles south. Drove to my place. Picked me up and we went to the pound to pay the fines. Get there and she forgot her driver's license. We had to drive back to her place and then back to the pound. 2 hours later the car is out of the pound. As I'm driving home I get a flat. Spare is flat so I had to limp to the nearest gas station. Fill it up and change it. Simple 1 hour favor turned into a 5 nightmare. Took an airplane trip halfway across the country to meet the girl of my dreams. Halfway there I forgot why I loved her. It was a bad year. Please tell the ending to that story. This happened to me today. Drove back a mile or so because I forgot my McFlurry at McDonald's. I almost made a huge mistake. I was staying in Cornwall, southwest pointy bit of England for a week and had just hit the M25 and motorway around London when I realized I left my key in Cornwall. 5-hour drive back. Stayed in a hotel and got stuck in traffic on the way back for a total travel time to London of 8 hours. Irony is overall you made good time. I left my weed at my house when I moved into my dorm my sophomore year of college. I drove there and back in 6 hours the next day. You gotta do what you've gotta do. You're never gonna meet new weed dealers with that attitude. We were in New York State, and my father forgot that our passports, we're Canadian, were in the deposit box at the front desk. By the time he remembered, he'd already returned our rented car and the key to the deposit box was on the key fob in the car. So now he has to go back to the hotel, a 3-hour drive, get a locksmith to drill the safe, and then come back. We were helping my sister pack to LA, about a 5-hour drive from where I am, one way, and I was in charge of holding the key to the lock that was on the moving truck. When we got there and my brother asked for the key, I realized I had forgotten it at home. You should have seen the whole family instantly turn to me and glare at me, and the color of my pants change from blue to brown. A little backstory. My grandfather passed away in June of 2007. He loved holidays with the family, especially Christmas. Every Christmas he would wear a pair of crazy, Christmas themed socks. Fast forward to Christmas of 2007. I decided to wear one red sock and one green sock as a tribute to Grandpa. My grandma was very touched by this and asked me if I wanted Grandpa's crazy Christmas socks, which obviously I did. Now I wear those socks every Christmas. Now to the relevant part. I'm originally from a small town in Nebraska just south of Omaha and my whole family lives in that area. I moved to the Kansas City area, about 3 hours away, in 2009. So, Christmas 2009 comes around and I set out on the 3-hour drive back home. About 2 hours into the trip I start thinking about how my grandma lights up whenever she sees those socks, and that's when I realize I left the socks in Kansas City. I got off the interstate at the next exit, did an about face, and drove 2 hours back to KC. I grabbed the socks, got back in the car, and drove the 3 hours back home again. Basically, I turned a 3-hour trip into 8 over a pair of socks. I would absolutely do it again though. This will probably get buried as this post is 8 hours old. My old professor has had a pet rock for 40 years and always keeps it in his pocket. He was evacuating before Katrina and was 6 hours into the traffic, only traveled about 20 miles before he realized that he forgot his pet rock at home. This mother drove back to his house, grabbed his rock, and proceeded to head back into the traffic while running from a death storm. Visiting Disneyland with my older sister. She lives in CA. She ended up forgetting her wallet there, so we traveled something like 100 miles to go get it again. Horrible part about this is she crapped her pants while we were taking the train back to go get it. The ending was definitely a twist. Spring break 1997. Packed up my clothes, some books, and my PC tower monitor because it was going to be a sweet freaking week of LAN gaming with my friends from high school. Drove 2 hours home, hooked it all up, and frick, I left all my game discs on my bed in a box in my dorm room. The next morning I drove all the way back down to get my discs and then all the way back. Oh, the joys of Steam. Drove all the way from San Diego to LAX. Realized that we forgot our boarding passes. Made the 1.75 hour drive home and grabbed them. Drove back. The girl at the counter didn't even ask for the tickets. When I was a kid, we used to go on these big family vacations. We'd travel with all of my aunts, uncles, cousins, etc. Actually, no etc. Just those people. Anyway, there were around maybe like 15 of us and we'd all meet up at my cousin's house before leaving since his place was the biggest. Needless to say, we had a ton of stuff to pack and things got hectic. By the time we'd make it out the door, we were always frizzled, running behind, and, yeah, you get the picture. Very easy to forget stuff. Well, we make it to the airport and have to run to our flight. I mean, we are booking it, lugging all this crap behind us. We all finally make it onto the plane and we settle in, catch our breath, and try to relax. I remember rifling through my bag when I felt sick to my stomach. I forgot something. I was about to tell my dad when all of a sudden my aunt just screams, "Kevin." Anyway, we eventually have to fly back to pick up my loser cousin who just wrecked his house. When I was around 5 or so, my family went to the beach and my little brother were running around by the edge of the ocean playing with our plastic pails and shovels. Then suddenly a huge, to 5-year-old me, wave splashed in and took my pail out to sea. I told my mom and she put on some goggles and jumped into the ocean. After a few dives I lost sight of her and could swear I didn't see her again for an hour, and I was sure she was lost somewhere deep in the ocean, until finally she triumphantly walked out of the depths of Poseidon's kingdom with my little pail in her hand. I got scolded for not thanking her when she gave it back to me, but how could I? You could have died, mom. You didn't need to go deep sea diving to get this stupid pail. That was the day little me started caring a lot less about material possessions. It wore off by the time I was 13 though. This was refreshingly adorable till the last sentence, then it was back to reality. Not quite the same thing as I didn't do the travelling, but when I was 4 I left my stuffed animal seal at a bed and breakfast in Scotland. I was devastated. A few weeks later he arrived by mail in Western Canada. TLDR, stuffed animal flew around the world to find 4-year-old boy. My sister and I were staying in Little Rock, AR for a long weekend. After checking out of the hotel, we made it over an hour away when she realized she forgot her high school graduation ring in the hotel room. Because it would have been cruel of me to continue, I turned around and went back. When we got back, a crazy storm almost blew the car off the road. Later, the same storm caused the Joplin tornado. I had to take a taxi to the nearest city at the border crossing between Canada and US at Fort Erie, because I had bought a one-way ticket to visit my parents' buff to LAX. It was going to be a few weeks, so I was counting on getting a cheaper return flight ticket while in the US. And apparently that meant I couldn't cross the border because I didn't have proof I was returning to Canada. So, taxi took me to Niagara Falls, Ontario, where I found a public library, convinced them to let me use the internet to buy the cheapest airplane ticket back, and print off the boarding pass before heading back to the border. I did a 5-hour round trip on a motorbike, in the rain, to get a calculator I'd left behind. Yes, I could have just bought a new calculator. No, I didn't even need it urgently. I just don't like to be wasteful, okay? I traveled across the city not that far, maybe 20 minutes, while on mushrooms because I had forgot a bag of weed on my bed in my room, and seeing as my parents were going to be home soon, I rushed to get to the house before they did. Finally got there, went to my room, checked my bed, not there, checked my pocket, there it was, the whole time, then got lost trying to find the house I was at beforehand. Took about an hour. Shrooms, constantly forcing you to question your reality. I lost my car key at my beach house one year and had work the next day as it was a Sunday. My dad was about 2 hours away at home with the spare. He drove all the way to the shore and back just to drop my spare keys off. It was Father's Day. I was ashamed. My children and I got home after visiting someone who lived 1,000 kilometers away. When I got home I realized I didn't have my purse. The last place I stopped was for gas in a little town at the 1-stroke 2-way mark. I had forgotten my purse in the bathroom. I phoned the gas station and someone had turned it in. The next day I had to drive to pick it up, so it was another 1,000 kilometers day. Nothing was missing from my purse. A friend and I drove 2 hours to a relative's beach house only to get there and realize I'd forgotten the keys. So a 2-hour drive turned into a 6-hour drive. Not long ago I was staying with some friends in a couple of little cabins on the summit of a small Himalayan mountain. When it came time for us to go back to the town, I stayed behind the group to clean the cabins and fetch water for the local chai shops. Eventually, I set out solo on the 3-4 hour hike down to McLeod Ganj. About an hour out, I check my pocket and realize I have the only set of keys to the only bathrooms on the summit. Bathrooms that we, as travelers, weren't even supposed to be allowed to use. We were allowed to use them, and to stay in the cabins, only because our guide was friend of the park service. Realizing that this could reflect very badly on him, a guy who I really respected, and that he might possibly be denied use of those facilities in the future, I started the trek back up. This was really very difficult terrain, and it took close to 2 hours to reach the top again. I walk into the cabin without a word, past the 2 curious park rangers, and place the keys on the mantle. Needless to say, my knees and calves were destroyed when I finally got back to town, but I was proud of myself for not saying frick it and tossing the keys off the side of the mountain. One time I forgot my gun at my mom's house. I'm a cop so I need it for work. Realized it a 10 PM work at 6 AM 4-hour round trip. Sigh. Dear Lord, my dad used to do this all the time. He was a sergeant at a sheriff's department. Always left it on top of the TV. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.